Konnichiwa. Today, we're going to talk about learning kanji the organic way. What do we mean by the organic way? We mean learning kanji not as isolated abstractions, but as integral parts of living Japanese words in real Japanese contexts. Now, some people argue against this method by saying that Japanese children learn kanji as kanji, not as part of words. And that's perfectly true, but they don't learn them as isolated abstractions the way a foreigner does. When Japanese children learn kanji, nearly all the time, they already know words in which those kanji are used. So, rather than learning an abstraction, they are learning the last piece of a puzzle, of which they already have all the other pieces. They already know words in which the kanji are used. They know what they mean. They know their nuances. They know their pronunciation. The kanji just provides the last element, and the important thing about this is that from the moment they learn that kanji, they are able to use it, to understand it when they see it on signs, or in a book, or anywhere, and to use it themselves in writing essays. The kanji becomes a part of their vocabulary, a part of their life. Now, we can't put you in that position, but we can do the next best thing, and that is to teach you kanji in such a way that, just as with Japanese children, from the minute you learn them, you already have a use for them. There are already things you can do with them. You can already understand them in at least the context of one word. Now, at first you'll be learning them in whatever word it is you happen first to encounter them in, but you'll quickly, if they are common kanji, see them in other contexts and deepen your knowledge of them. This is the organic way. This is the natural way to pick up the knowledge. However, we can't learn kanji without some drilling, so we have to use Anki to help us consolidate those kanji as we learn them. So, how do we go about learning kanji? Ideally, before you start doing it through the fundamental method that we use, that is immersion, through encountering them in subtitled anime or other Japanese media, you should have a base of a few kanji just as you have a base of some vocabulary. One way of acquiring this is to use my Alice in Kanjiland book with its associated Anki deck, which will not only give you a base of around 200 kanji, but also make you familiar with free radicals, those kanji elements that are not in themselves kanji, and with the way kanji fit together, and the way we use them, and the way they work in words. But it doesn't matter how you get this early basis. Whether it's with Alice in Kanjiland or in some other way, that doesn't matter. Once we have a small base of kanji, we can then go ahead and start learning them in earnest. So how do we do this? Let us say that we encounter a kanji in our anime. What do we do to break it down and learn it? Let's suppose that we encounter this kanji, which is ha, or tooth, in the context of the word haguruma. Haguruma is ha plus the word kuruma, which you will perhaps already know. It's kuruma, which is usually used to mean car, an automobile. However, as well as meaning car, it also means wheel. So haguruma means tooth wheel or a cogwheel. So if we already know kuruma, we enter this word haguruma into our Anki, and we're paying special attention to ha because we've never seen it before. What do we do with ha? Now, it looks quite complicated, doesn't it? It looks like one of the more difficult kanji, but actually it's made up of 3 parts, all of which are quite simple, and 2 of which you'd certainly know already if you've done Alice in Kanji Land. Now, if you don't know what the parts are, how do you go about finding out? I'm going to recommend another free and very useful tool. This is called KawaJapa. It's very similar to Yomi-chan, which I introduced before. It is a browser add-on which allows you to hover over a Japanese word in kanji and get the reading and the meaning. I haven't recommended it so far because it doesn't link up to Anki the way that Yomi-chan does, and that's one of the most important things about Yomi-chan in our method. However, KawaJapa does something that Yomi-chan doesn't, which is very important for learning kanji. Fortunately, you can install them both on your browser at the same time, and they won't clash with each other or cause any problems. You can just turn one or the other on or off in the toolbar on your browser whenever you want to. You can even run them simultaneously if you really want to. So, when we use KawaJapa on the word haguruma, we get the reading of the kanji, which is haguruma, and the meaning. Now, if we press the Shift key, we get this, which gives us a lot of information about the first kanji, ha. If we want information about the second kanji, we just have to move the cursor. But currently we're looking at ha. A lot of this information you don't really need, but the important part is this. As you see, it gives us the breakdown of the kanji into its 3 elements, which are the kanji in tomeru, stop, and the kanji for kome, rice. And this, a kanji element which is not in itself a kanji, and that's the enclosing element, which is called the open box. So now you have the 3 elements of the kanji, 2 of which you probably know already. And what do we do about understanding and remembering this kanji? Well, we make a little story. This is something that Heisik Sensei also does, and a lot of people think he invented this because he was one of the main people to introduce it into the West, but in fact, this method of learning kanji has been used as long as there have been kanji, so it goes back at least a few thousand years. We make a little story based on the elements. So, for example, we know that this means tooth or teeth, so we might say, when there's a lot of rice in an open box, we have to put a stop on the top, otherwise the dog will have his teeth in it. Or we could say, when I put a lot of rice into the empty box called my mouth, the thing that stops it is my teeth. It doesn't matter what sort of a little story you make up, provided it will help you to remember the kanji. You put this word on the front, haguruma, and you have on the back, automatically, from Yomi-chan, as I've shown you before, the pronunciation of the word, the meaning of the word, the sound file of the pronunciation of the word, and then you go into the browser on your Anki and add for yourself your mnemonic of the kanji so that you don't forget it. You may not need to look at this many times, but it's a good idea to have it there. So you don't have to edit every Anki card that you make, but it's a good idea to edit those ones that contain a new kanji. Now, if this is your first encounter with ha, this is where you'll actually learn the kanji, and then you'll encounter it in other contexts. Some people may say, well, possibly because you got ha there together with kuruma, you'll be able to recognize it even from that little context on the front of the card. Indeed, that is possible, but it doesn't matter because if you find that you're not recognizing it in some real-life contexts, you will of course add the words in which you're not recognizing it. And you'll quickly end up adding ha itself because it makes a word on its own, and then you'll have to recognize it. The point about this method of learning is that we're learning kanji live in the wild, so we quickly, if they're at all common, start seeing them in lots of different words in our Anki. So we're kind of hitting them from a number of different angles. And we quickly start saying, I see, the pin in hempin is the same as the hin in jo-hin, even though it's got a little maru. We start recognizing kanji in different contexts and making friends of them. Now, another question that people may ask is, since we're seeing kanji in context and recognizing them, isn't it possible that we'll start confusing one kanji with another because we may not remember its exact construction? And it's certainly true that as you get to recognize kanji, you will forget a lot of your mnemonics. And that's not a bad thing, that's a good thing, because we don't want to be cluttering our brain with a lot of mnemonic junk once it's served its purpose. It's good to just recognize the kanji, and that's what's going to happen. But it can mean that we haven't got precise enough information about a kanji, even though we recognize its face when we see it, and then when we see a very similar kanji, we can get confused. Does this matter, and what do we do about it? Well, a lot of people treat this as if it would be some kind of a disaster, and I think the basis of this kind of thinking is that a lot of Japanese teaching has been based around exams. Even people who aren't taking exams are using methods of teaching that were originated for the purpose of exams. And it's true that if you go through a period where you can't tell one kanji from another, and you take an exam in which you're shown a lot of similar kanji, you may have a problem with the exam. But we're not talking about exams here. We're talking about natural immersion, where your Japanese grows naturally and organically over time. So it doesn't really matter if you have these problems, because we can tackle them as we come to them in our real self-immersion Japanese life. So, for example, if you discover that you are confusing these three kanji, or any two of them, now you see they have a common element, and all three of them are pronounced in their on-reading gu, so in a sense they're what we might call three sound sisters. That element is not included in the Sound Sisters deck because it's not common enough, but if you use the Sound Sisters deck, you'll become sensitive to lesser Sound Sisters like this gu. So as we see, they look kind of similar, and if we find that we can't distinguish between them easily, what we do is we make a disambiguation card. This is the nearest thing we'll ever do to making a pure kanji card, and it's not in fact a pure kanji card because we're going to disambiguate them by reminding ourselves which kanji comes in which word that we already know. Now again, some people would worry about this. Is there something wrong with not having learned it properly in the first place and having to come back and disambiguate it? No, there's nothing wrong with this. It's a perfectly natural way of learning. The kanji we learn is usable when we first learn it. It's usable right from the beginning. And then if we have disambiguation problems later, we can solve them easily enough. And we're not wasting our time learning a lot of detail that in most cases we aren't really going to need. So here are the three, and we put these three on the front of our card. We put the word that we've learned them in, or whichever word we prefer out of several that we've learned them in, by each kanji on the back, so we have them disambiguated. But then the important thing is to notice the features of the kanji that distinguish them and work out a story for each. If this differs from the story we had for them in the first place, again, this doesn't matter. Hitting them from as many angles as possible is perfectly fine. It just makes them better friends. So let's look at the element that's common to all of them. First of all, this one I would call an insect in a box in a field. The top element is obviously the field. The bottom element is another box element. It's the other way up, so instead of the open box, we call this the closed or upside down box. And then we have something which is like the insect kanji. We're cheating a little bit here because we're using the field as the body of the insect, but that doesn't matter. We just need to be able to recognize it. So this we're calling the insect in the box in the field. And this is the sound element gu, and also has a meaning, which we'll discover now. So if we look first at the first and simplest of these kanji, if you look in the dictionary, you'll see that it has a few definitions. It can mean temporary abode, or it can mean implication or suggestion. And a thing I suggest doing with words in general, when they have more than one definition, is trying to look for the root meaning. So for example, the word kiru, cut, means literally to cut, but it has lots of other extended meanings, just as English cut does. Cut means literally cutting something with a knife or a pair of scissors or something, but if someone's doing something and we say cut it out, or if we say take a shortcut across the field, or if we say cut that scene from a movie, we're using it in various extended senses. Now, it's the same with this one. Its original meaning is temporary dwelling, and its extended meaning is implication or suggestion. Now, how does that come about? Now, it's worth knowing that human language is 80 to 90% metaphor, because whenever we talk about something abstract, it has to come ultimately from a concrete metaphor. So, in this case, the use of the concept of a temporary dwelling to mean implication or suggestion is this. A word has a meaning which is its permanent meaning, but when it's used in a particular way, another meaning temporarily dwells in it. That's its suggestion or implication on a particular occasion when it's being used. So this kanji is made up of our gu plus a house. That element on the top is the house free radical, means house. So we can say that that's the bit that means dwelling, and the other part means temporary or fleeting or vagrant. So a temporary dwelling is either literally that, or it is the temporary dwelling of a meaning within a word or expression. It's its implication or suggestion. And we'll say that the word we've learned this in is guwa, which means a fable or an allegory. In other words, a story which has an extra meaning or suggestion about it. It's not just being told for the sake of the story, but also for the sake of the moral or principle that it implies. So on the back of our card, we're going to say that this is the gu of guwa, which we already know, and we should only try to disambiguate kanji once we already know words in which they appear. So we say that this is the gu of guwa, or fable, and we make a note as large or small as necessary just to indicate to ourselves that the house plus the vagrant or fleeting or temporary meaning means temporary dwelling, which means in turn implication or suggestion. Now the next one is the gu of guzen, which means a coincidence or a chance meeting. Now here we again have temporary or fleeting, and we have this free radical on the left, which is in fact the free radical version of the hito radical, so it means a person. So person plus fleeting or vagrant or temporary means chance meeting, and by extension any kind of chance or accidental or random event. Now this is the gu of gu zen. So zen here simply means nature, something the nature of which is chance or coincidence, rather than something planned or necessary. And the third one has that gu element with a heart, so it means a fleeting or vagrant heart. What does that actually mean? This is the gu that we find in various expressions like gumon, which is a foolish question, and also in its kun reading it makes the word oroka, which is a fool. Now, a fleeting or vagrant heart, we have to remember that kokoro, heart, in Japanese, does not refer to the physical heart, that's shinzo. It refers to the mind or spirit or feelings. So, a fleeting or vagrant mind is a mind that can't concentrate on anything, and therefore a foolish mind. So this means fool or folly. So now, when we see any of those three, instead of thinking that they look somewhat similar, we're going to focus in on the points that distinguish them. The heart, the person, the house. So all of this, as you see, is simply a set of techniques for helping us to know kanji as part of words and to become more familiar with them as we see them in more and more words. And to do that study part, which we have to do because even native Japanese people spend 9 years learning kanji, so we've got to have some way of actually drilling and studying them, and we do that through our Anki deck, which is the same Anki deck that we are learning our vocabulary. So we don't have a separate kanji study. Essentially, other than learning structure, all our study is concentrated in one Anki deck. We can do others on the side for particular reasons, such as the Sound Sisters deck, which is very well worth doing. But our fundamental main study is concentrated on that one deck, and the rest of our efforts go into real immersion, which is the most important and central thing in the organic learning of Japanese. If you have any questions or comments, please put them in the comments below and I will answer. I'd like to thank my gold Kokeshi patrons who make these videos possible, and all my patrons and supporters on Patreon and everywhere. And I'd like to thank you for attending this lesson. これからもよろしくお願いします。Class dismissed.